Adam,
How you doing?
how's it going?
I'm doing good. Rushed all the way from New Jersey to the dreadful rental car place. Now I'm here
Right.
at your lovely home.
At least you get to be in Florida.
That is true. Which, by the way, I've now officially dubbed Florida as America's Australia.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for people who may not be familiar with you,
Mhm.
you want to introduce yourself?
I'm a columnist at the New York Post and Fox News. I also write for a bunch of other places. I moved to Florida from New York 2 years ago, very publicly, because I was a lifelong New Yorker and a self-described New York supremacist. And I've never been happier. Such a, great thing that we did. And we just feel like geniuses every day. Like, we didn't move because of current situations, like the angry protests or, blocking traffic or even crime. I can't say that we moved because of crime, but like things like that have just spiraled, and it's like, wow, we made the right call.
Yeah. So what was the, first.
Yeah, get in there.
I mean, I don't know if I should rip it open or not, but let's go for it. So what was the final straw for you?
So we had done a test run in Florida. Well, let me just back up and say that I'm a lifelong New Yorker. My husband's a lifelong New Yorker. I grew up in Brooklyn. He grew up in Queens. We had just finished renovating our dream house that we moved into March 2020. And then, that spring, we just locked down along with everybody else. We followed all the directions. We made cloth masks out of old pajamas. And we did the whole thing. We tried to go along to get along, even though a lot of it seemed really stupid. But then the summer happened and there were the riots around the George Floyd killing. And that would have been, an event that happened in New York that would have not kind of made a dent for us to leave. We would have never thought, oh, we'll get out of here because of this. But coupled with COVID, we just saw such an insanity rise up. Like, the $4 million brownstones on our street put defund police signs in the windows because who cares? You could just defund the police and park slopers will be totally fine. And then, these people who had spent the summer marching for equity didn't say a word when private schools opened, but public schools didn't. And it was like, oh, yeah, well, that's just what we do. We open private schools, but public schools certainly can't open. That's just unsafe.
They're the virus spreaders.
Right, yeah. They're the only ones who have the virus. So that really made us consider leaving. And then we did like a test run in Florida where we just got a vacation rental and sent our kids to the open schools in winter of 21, when New York schools were still closed, or mostly closed. My daughter her school was fully closed. My two sons, it was like an occasional schedule.
Right.
And then the masks just stayed on kids far, far too long. They, the elderly governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, was like seen maskless all the time. Governor Cuomo before her never wore a mask. And yet my kindergartner had to wear a mask outside during recess. And all of these things, like maybe we could have lived with one thing or two things, but it was just a constant drumbeat of insanity. We couldn't get over how crazy everything was and how nobody was speaking up.
I met so many people, whether it made them move or it made them get into politics, but the masking of the children,
huge.
That was a really big one. I know somebody else who moved from Manhattan to Orlando, couldn't be happier. And for that was the final straw. You want to put a mask on my child?
Yeah. Well, nobody else masks. The key thing is like the kids were always the safest from the COVID virus in the first place. And yet, like, they were at the absolute most, precaution taking point. Even after the vaccines came out, they still masked toddlers because toddlers didn't have a vaccine. But I would just be like, toddlers don't need a vaccine. Their risk is zero. You can't reduce it under zero. So just move on, but nobody would.
See, with that attitude, we'll never make it into negative. I mean, all right, so obviously you were public about how you're feeling
Right.
And leaving. Was that contentious in your personal circle?
Mm, no.
No? Okay.
Well, I was born in the Soviet Union. So I grew up we called it the Russian community in Brooklyn, but almost no one in it was Russian or born in Russia. I was born in Russia, actually, but I was one of the few. My father's from Ukraine, but all my friends are either from Ukraine or Belarus or Kazakhstan or just, kind of ran the gamut of the ex-Soviet republics, but we referred to it just shorthanded to the Russian community. So the Russian community in Brooklyn is quite conservative, and a lot of people left. I mean, tons of Russian speakers left New York during that time to come to Florida because they had the same kind of concerns and thoughts that I did. Plus, we all had this, totalitarian background to say, like, this is when things get crazy. People are just blindly following rules that make no sense. Wear the mask into the restaurant, but then when you sit down, you could take it off. Like, what?
Well, of course.
Or when the doctors came out and said that, protesting was fine, but no other social activity would be okay. It's like, this isn't science. And so I think that a lot of people who had come from the Soviet republics like I had were feeling very similarly. Even the ones who couldn't leave, couldn't leave, but they understood. They understood why I needed to get out.
Yeah, one of the actually it was now it's a family friend, but it was a coworker of my wife's at the time. She's Ukrainian, and all like exactly to a T what you described. Her husband's NYPD and everything, and he's like, man, what is like everybody? It was so crazy. Like it seems so long ago, but not that long ago at the same time.
I'm still angry about it regularly. Get myself worked up and like pissed off about it. Because look, I was able to save my kids. I'm very lucky. I was able to, my husband and I were both able to just pick up our jobs and move to another state.
Right.
Not everybody could do that. And I had grown up pretty poor in Brooklyn, and I knew tons of people who couldn't just move. That was a line that people on the internet would say to me, like, you don't like it? Well, just move. Like, okay, well, moving's hard. And I have a whole family in Brooklyn and in like my in-laws on Long Island, and etc. It's not that easy to just move. And I know that the people who had the financial situation where they couldn't move, even if they, wanted to. And those are the same people who also couldn't send their kids to private schools that were open, and they couldn't go to their beach house and send their kids to open schools there, or all the things that rich people did trying to get over the pandemic and not have it affect their children. A lot of people didn't have those options. They couldn't form a tutoring group and hire a private tutor. All these things were only available to a sliver of people. And what was the worst part for me was that none of those people were speaking up for everybody else. And that's really what forced us out. When we talk about it, my husband and I, we talk about the things we couldn't unsee. And that is the kind of thing that made us leave.
Yeah. I think when there are times of major stress, that's when you see who people are.
Exactly.
And I think the pandemic showed me a lot of what our politicians are. Everybody's always like slippery slope.
Oh, yeah.
But I kind of like, all right, yeah, man, maybe. But what we saw was just complete incompetence, or we saw wanting to do the safest possible thing, right? Even if it made zero sense. One of the very few people who wasn't was like DeSantis.
Right.
It's like, show me the data. This doesn't make sense. We're not going to do that. But everybody else was just like, yeah. We're just going to caution sake, 2 weeks, then turns into 2 months, then 2 years. And then I'm sitting back watching this and none of it makes any sense.
Right.
And then if you ask a question, like
There's no questions allowed.
No questions. One of the, no longer a friend, to preface that, someone I used to talk to all the time and question things and stuff like that. And I said, what is it with 6 feet? I've been alive a long time, never heard of 6 feet. I've heard when you're sick, stay away from people. I've heard, when you blow your nose, come your mouth. But I've never heard a specific number as like, if it's 5 feet, it's terrible. 6 is okay. Like, I just never heard of that. And I remember her saying, stop sounding ignorant.
Right.
I'm not allowed to ask a question about a concept I've never heard in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I interviewed Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. I was telling him about this.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, there's no such thing.
Completely made up.
It's completely made up.
The guy that like completely made it up has admitted to that. Been like, oh yeah, we looked at some old like flu studies and decided, 6 feet.
Yeah.
And that was it. And, people think of it as like, oh, what's the big deal? 6 feet, like who, but that 6 feet is why kids didn't go to school. Because New York City public schools, for example, don't have 6 feet of space between the kids. So they put 6 feet of space between the kids and they only let the kids go to school sometimes. Now, a rational person, as in nobody running the New York City school system and nobody in New York City government would have asked, where are the kids when they're not in school? Are they like at home clustered in their room? No, they're in childcare or at a daycare center or at a babysitter. They're out there being closer than 6 feet to other people. And ultimately, it turned out that version of schooling, the sometimes school, I call it, the 2 days, 3 days, you're on and off, that spread the most COVID because they weren't together every day. They were spread out throughout the city, meeting other people. And apparently that was absolutely the worst way for the kids to spread COVID.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was telling me was that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because if you're sick, you into a room and you cough, it stays in the air. It doesn't matter if it's 6 feet or not. Like you can leave the room and I can walk in and I got it. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's the part it's like we pretended that this is the new truth, the new normal.
Yep.
We're in a bizarre world. And then if you like, hey guys, this doesn't make any sense. They're like, shut up, bigot, shut up. You want to kill grandma.
Right. And it's interesting because I think that also it was an era of, forced conformity for sure, but cancellation mania, right? People were afraid to have their bosses called and say, hey, your employee wants teachers to die. I heard this line exactly from people. And of course, our mutual friend Jennifer Say did lose her job because she dared to believe that kids should go to school. And that's a ridiculous thing to believe, apparently. Everybody else gets to go on with their lives, but not kids. Kids can't go to school. So just that whole time period, I remain bitter about it. And I don't feel like anybody was held accountable. And I don't think that anybody faced any consequences. And Randy Weingarten gets to pretend that she tried to open schools when we know she specifically rewrote CDC policy to keep that 6 foot nonsense there. Because again, if they move it to 3 feet, then more schools open and you can't have that.
Right. That's been the most entertaining part about all this. The revisionist history.
Oh, yeah.
I never said that.
Right.
You mean this tweet and this tweet and this tweet?
Right.
Like, it's absolutely crazy. The thing that really, because you said you think about this often, the thing that really gets me was forcing my wife to get the vaccine or lose her job.
Yeah.
And I've sort of talked about this before, but like everybody's like, oh, she made a choice.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's not a choice.
Work or not work. Right.
That's coercion.
Eat or not eat.
Right.
Right.
Coercion and choice are two separate things.
Exactly.
It's like, you want to get shot or stabbed?
Right.
Probably you chose to get shot. That's the kind of that's the kind of situation that we put people in. And if my wife really wanted to stick to it, she could have lost her job and been in some sort of financial issue. I was telling Dr. J. Bhattacharya about how I was sitting there listening for OSHA. I was like, please do not pass this.
Right.
Because you're going to make my life hell.
Yeah.
Even my employer was like, Adam, I don't want to do this. But in preparation,
Yes.
here are you just letting you know this is what it's going to look like. And I was like, I don't want to get, my whole thing is this. If there's a vaccine available, great. You want it, get it. But let me have the choice. Let me have the choice to do it. If I want to get it because it's now a requirement at a different job, then I'll make that choice to get it. But I've been working here the entire time, right? And we've gotten sick. We got sick together. We should have bonded as an employer, right? But now we're supposed to get this vaccine so we don't get sick again. Yeah. Like to me, it was just so insane. But that was like the first time I like actively was just listening to a ruling. It's like, please, God.
Right. There was so many panels that I listened to that I've never listened to this kind of thing before. I had a lot of trust. I had a lot of trust in our healthcare, agencies and the people. If you had told me in 2019 that in 2024 you will not believe a word that comes out of the CDC, like, I would have found that surprising. I was very pro all the vaccines. I still am in a lot of ways, but like I absolutely think twice about every single thing that they tell me because it's just all seems like a lie now. And it was obvious at the time. And I took the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine because I wanted the vaccine. I wanted to get over. I wanted COVID to end. I thought that was what we were all doing. Turned out, no, not at all. And I love noting that I've never had COVID. Like I've had my antibodies tested, just kind of by accident twice. 0. No, I've never even sniffed COVID. So I like to say that I did everything wrong and I never got COVID.
Of course. I got it twice.
Those people who are like, I did everything right and I still got it. And like, oh, I did everything wrong and I didn't.
It was really good. I got COVID twice. What was the first one? The first variant? I can't remember what it was called.
I don't know. I don't remember. Everybody only remembers Omicron. Right?
Yeah, I got Omicron, which was very whatever. But I had the first one, and that one was weird. Because I remember I needed to take the trash out, and I was like, I feel like I played a pickup basketball game. Like, like I was like, ooh, I'm winded. Yeah, so that was a weird one. But at the end of the day, it still just felt like the flu. I don't know. I worry. Part of me worries that it'll happen again. And then the other part of me is like, even the people who are doing like the revisionist history are doing it for a reason.
They are, but I still think, no, but this time is
time is different.
COVID-29, totally different than COVID-19. Like, you got to be real this time. This time kids can't go to school at all. It's just, we can't ever, I don't mean we, but we have to make it hard for those people again. It won't happen the same way. I think people are always waiting for, the similar thing to correct. Like, I think all but one senator voted for the Patriot Act in 2001. And I think all these senators are now like, I would never vote for the Patriot Act. But like, they don't realize it won't always look exactly like the Patriot Act.
Right.
It'll be different. It'll be slightly different the next time with COVID or with whatever pandemic it is. Like, no, this time you need to take it serious. Yes, last time we were wrong, but this time, so you have to beware.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Speaking of which, I wrote this like fantasy article for Epoch Times. It's called "The Need for COVID Reparations." It was just complete fantasy because it would never happen. But like, for the people who were fired for not getting the vaccine, you either give them their job back or you pay them reparations.
I don't see why that's not a bigger issue. Like I guess they can't sue, but they should. They should be able to. Like they lost something for no reason. You know, it's just they're owed. You know, they're owed. I think something.
Yeah. I don't know. That was probably the most fantasy article I've ever written about. Because I was like, the government holds itself accountable. No way. But we should definitely, anybody who is like, and see, this is the area where it's a little bit funny when it comes to Trump. Because Trump, all about the vaccines. Now, I understand Trump. Trump likes anything that he did. So anything that he did was absolutely wonderful. He will not have a critical thought about it, and he will defend it to the death.
Yeah.
So I understand why he is like, the vaccine's great, vaccine,
Right.
But that's a little bit of a tricky area for some people.
I think the people who are pro-Trump is extremely difficult to get them off that hand. So I don't think it'll actually matter. I think he'll pick up the people who think the vaccines were amazing, and he won't lose anybody who thinks that they're like the worst thing, you know? And most people will probably be in the middle anyway. They'll be somewhere between those two perspectives, and I don't think he'll lose any of them either. It just, yeah, people who support Donald Trump, and I, said this a lot, it's like they've been called all kinds of names. They've been shunned by friends and family. They're not going to just separate from him over positions or ideology or things he says. They've already gone over a serious hurdle to support him, and now they're there. It's like when we talk about like VP candidates. To me, I could totally see him picking. I know this, and I don't think this actually happened, but I could see it. Nikki Haley. She has a ton of money. She brings a voter base that he doesn't necessarily have. I don't think he'll do it because he's Donald Trump and he does what he wants, and just because something like makes sense on paper doesn't mean But the argument that his base will rebel, they won't. Yeah. They were like, Nikki Haley, amazing,
I've seen so much rationalization. No, she's not that bad. Like, as soon as he picks her,
right.
I know we called her a warmonger, but like, how many wars did she monger for, So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I know some people who kind of walked away, but the vast majority, obviously, you saw what happened in the primaries. The man didn't even campaign, and he won in that landslide. So now here's the thing that's tricky. Talked about this. I don't know if you're seeing this, but I'm seeing a shift behind the scenes with the Republican Party. I see a preparation for Trump leaving. I'm getting a vibe. All right, so background. I used to be a Democrat. So one of the things when, in left-wing media, they used to talk about is like, these hyper-conservative Christians, the evangelical Christians have so much influence and power. But when Trump comes in, they don't. Trump's been the man basically since 2016. And so even if Trump wins, he's a lame duck president. He's going to be gone in 4 years.
Right.
So what happens after 4 years?
What happens?
The old guard comes back.
You think so?
I'm starting to. It's not even just that it's a specific person. It's a political movement and a return of a political philosophy within the party of, and I say this as a Christian, of evangelical Christian principles being made first when it comes to political decisions. So going back to the what's your favorite passage in the Bible as someone's running for office?
I like the biblical passage question because a lot of people claim to read the Bible and then they don't. I think you could also be like, what's your favorite book? Or, I like the questions that expose people not being honest about who they are. And
Right.
to me, the question of what's your favorite Bible passage is one of those questions.
I can see that. I guess for me, I don't like the way I see faith, and everybody's different. The way I see faith is it's personal.
Mhm.
And so when you're doing that, what you're doing is some sort of test. And I'm thinking, all right, if I'm running for office, does it matter which passage is my favorite passage or not?
If you've been on the record saying that you read the Bible all the time, yeah.
Maybe if you don't. Because a
Well,
lot
if
of
you
them
don't, that's fine.
But they still get those
But
questions.
don't pretend that you do. But just,
Yeah.
then the answer is, I'm not a big Bible reader.
Yeah.
But be yourself. I want the authenticity, and anything that exposes inauthentic. Like, what's Trump's favorite Bible passage? I don't think
you never heard that answer?
he said something like they're all my favorite.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's Donald Trump. He'll be like, the Bible, amazing, big fan.
The best book.
Yeah.
Tremendous book.
Right.
Some say the greatest.
Some say, yeah.
I think I understand what you mean as far as the can't even speak, authenticity part. And that makes sense. I was using that as kind of like a throwaway kind of thing. But I do see a push for the evangelical closed tent philosophy. Because when Trump came in, his famous line, "What do you have to lose?"
Right.
Right?
Right.
Anybody that likes me, come and vote for me. I don't care what you are.
Yeah.
And that opened up the Republican Party, this big tent party, no matter who you like to have sex with, color your skin, so on and so forth.
The thing is, I wouldn't say that previous Republicans didn't try for the Big Tent. They all clearly did. They all, what I think makes Trump unique is that he is like, come join my tent, but I'm not changing anything. I'm going to be me. And that, again, people respond to that authenticity. They think that the way he is the way he is. And so I don't know. I like the push for the evangelical return. I mean, it's very possible that we have but like, what would that look like? A Mike Pence candidate? I don't know. I think people vote for personality to such an extent now that it doesn't really matter which sect you're with. It really is, who do I want to have a beer with, prefer to have a beer with. And that makes it tough for good candidates who maybe aren't super personable to break through, no matter which. Again, if they might be evangelical, but if they don't have like the personality to draw people in, it's going to be a tough hurdle.
I guess the area where we might see the most, if my hypothesis is correct, I think the area that we'll see it affect the most, is state and local elections. Because it's not just, okay, there's a candidate, do I like him or not? Well, why is that the candidate? And it's because, well, they got support, right? And so even down to who gets support, which particular candidates locally, whether it be a state race for a state position of some sort, or even within the party itself, right? Is the philosophy going to change? Because I can tell you, just talking to different people who are behind the scenes Republicans, Trump has a huge influence. It's basically, do you support Trump or not? And then what ends up happening is everyone just becomes replicas of Trump. Like, if Trump says this, yes, I'm doing this. But when he disappears, what happens? Like, will those people still exist? Maybe, but maybe they won't be as impactful. Maybe the test won't be how much of Trump's policies do you support, and it gets replaced by something else.
Right. But of course, we do have popular Republicans, like I'm thinking Maryland, for example. There are places where being a Trump supporter as a Republican is negative, and they still end up succeeding. Georgia, another example. Brian Kemp, famously anti-Trump, yet keeps getting reelected and has a lot of sway. So I don't know. I think that there are post-Trump paths. I don't know if he doesn't win though. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I could see him running again at 28. There's no universe where Donald Trump
man.
won't keep running. 28, 32, 36. Like,
I guess, well, I'll say one thing that really bothers me, and granted, I know he's getting sued left and right, but it doesn't seem like it bothers anybody that he's using his campaign funds to pay his legal bills.
right.
And I'm like, that's not a good sign, guys.
No.
Like, I
Well,
don't know.
because the problem, where I see it with that more than anything else is, I think he becomes susceptible to donors who want to give him money if he does certain things, or he famously was like, I don't belong to anyone, right? That was what made him so appealing in 2016. It's much harder to make that I don't belong to anybody argument when you need their money.
Right.
And that's again why I think like the Nikki Haley thing, and I don't, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it makes sense because she has all this donor cash and she comes with donors that he doesn't already have.
Right. Possibly. That could possibly happen. But let's go to the meat of the question, though, about VP. Does it matter?
Oh, I think it matters,
You think
especially
so?
because he only has the one term. I think whoever it is becomes the standard bearer for 28, assuming they win. And that becomes just an interesting question because it's, what does Trump want to see happen in 28? Does he want there to be a post-Trump Republican Party? Does he want his kids involved? There's a lot of questions. So I think it matters a lot who he picks as VP, more than in most situations.
All right, let me rephrase that. All right, so you're saying it matters more to Trump than maybe the party itself. But I mean, as far as voters.
Yeah, I think the voters will see it as who. Okay, maybe not. Maybe not in a traditional "I'm voting for a ticket" kind of situation.
Yeah.
If it is somebody like Nikki Haley, he ends up bringing in voters who don't like him but will hold their nose and vote for the ticket because they like her. Will they get, more suburban women that way and that kind of thing? That's possible. But if he picks somebody solid, like just a solid, VP who maybe is well liked in the Republican Party and just generally considered loyal to Trump. I'm thinking of J.D. Vance, for example. Like, will that move the needle? I don't know. I don't know about that. But it will position J.D. Vance to be, this is the future. This is what the future of the Republican Party looks like.
Right. Part of the reason I ask that is because I almost feel like when we talk about, absent of like this one, whenever we talk about VPs, it feels like political fantasy football. Oh, we just got to take this guy, put him with this guy. There's a super ticket.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I've been around for some time. I've never heard someone say, I'm voting for this person because of the vice president.
Yeah.
I've just never heard that. I've heard the opposite.
People. Yes, I've heard the opposite too. But funny, like, for example, when we think of the opposite, we think of the John McCain, but I voted for that ticket because of Sarah Palin. I was like, I love her at the time, she gave this amazing speech. I remember her so clearly. Like my husband and I think maybe we were dating already at that point, but like we were driving somewhere. It was Labor Day weekend, and we're listening to her speech, and she is like, thanks, but no thanks to the bridge to nowhere. And I was like, oh, this woman, she's got it going on. Like, she says all the right things. She seems very conservative. I didn't think of John McCain as very conservative, so I saw her as kind of dragging him rightward, which is what I wanted. Obviously, I feel differently now, but I felt differently when she resigned as governor. To me, that was like, how could you? How could you do this?
What was her reason for resigning?
I mean, just didn't feel like doing it anymore. But there was no great reason.
It's like a UK politician.
Yeah, it was really weird. And the thing is that I had spent all this time defending her as like not a joke. And then she turned herself into a joke. And I felt really personally maligned by that because I had, I had written all this stuff like Sarah Palin's a real person. She has real positions. These are what they are. I took her seriously. And then she was just like, nope, I'm not actually a serious person. I'm a person who makes like ridiculous decisions and, says ridiculous things just to get reaction.
Yeah. I mean, at the time I was a Democrat. She just seemed a bit, you know what it seemed like? Like she wasn't ready. And so we were just talking about what's your favorite quote? What's your favorite book? And that one question tripped her up, which is like a typical question that they always ask.
One book, like, yeah. No, she wasn't ready. But the thing is, you have to have good staff for that kind of thing. Like, look, when you're on the road and you're asked a million questions, like you might not be able to think of a book right away. I like just now, I'm like, what's my favorite book? Like my favorite book? I mean, I'm a big reader. I have a huge library, but like, off the top of my head, favorite book, I'm not sure what I would go with. I'd be like, Milan Kundera, something by him, like Life is Elsewhere. Finally, I got there a few minutes in, but like not instant, But when you have a good staff, they're gonna ask you these questions today. Be ready. What's your favorite Bible passage? What's your favorite book? What do you like to eat for breakfast? Like these are questions that you don't necessarily have at tip of your tongue when you're a regular person. But when you have staff and when you have people to guide you, that helps.
Now the question is, and this might sound like an obvious question, it might sound like there's an obvious answer. Was Sarah chosen because she's a woman?
Yes, but also because she was so conservative. I think she was a right-wingy woman, and that is what he needed. He needed John McCain was seen as a very moderate person, a very moderate candidate. And I think he needed somebody to shore up the right for him, and she was that person. So, yeah, of course, it was because she was a woman partly, and she was younger and all these things, the balance. But I think it was more ideological than gender.
Okay.
You were a Democrat, huh?
I was a Democrat. I was Obama.
Oh boy.
Yeah. My favorite lie from the left was that he had no scandals except for the tan suit.
Yeah.
Nothing at all.
Right.
Couldn't be the wars that he increased.
Yeah. No, Fast and Furious. I've never heard about that again.
It was a movie, right?
They ran guns into Mexico to see what would happen, and then they lost track of the guns. But
that sounds exactly like our government.
It really does. Yeah. And I remember asking, I played this long running poker game, and I'm one of the few conservatives, and people love being like, how about that Donald Trump, whatever. But I remember saying to them, what do you think about Fast and Furious? And none of them had heard of it because they all read the New York Times, and the New York Times didn't cover it. So that's a real tough thing for the right to overcome, that the left simply does not hear about things. Like right now, these, protest riots happening on campuses. The left really doesn't get it covered very much.
Yeah.
It's not in their news nearly the way it is on the right.
So I don't know if this is a controversial take on or not. So especially over the past year, I've been kind of zooming out on stuff, especially when I look at online content and stuff like that. And it becomes less about the thing, but why the thing. And when I look at what's happening on these different campuses across the country, obviously there's the pro-Palestine, there's those positions, right? That's the easy stuff. But I'm zooming out and I'm saying, why?
Right.
Why this? And it makes me think back to when people would talk about the Civil War, how two factions would get together and blood and mayhem, gore. But it's happening right here. And the rest, the outside towns, everything's normal. No idea. And that's what it almost feels like to me.
Right.
It almost feels like absolute mayhem from both sides. Because you have people who are just, I'm just going to go down to Columbia. They have nothing to do with Columbia. They're injecting themselves into this almost like a manufactured civil war. And I'm saying, why? Why is this the case? And I'm almost to the point where I have no vested interest in Colombia or any of these places, like most people. And we've been talking about these places being places where they indoctrinate people.
Right.
Let them ruin it.
Right.
You know, that's almost how I feel.
Yeah.
And
I'll tell you what the challenge to this is.
Yes.
Is that those people graduate and go into the most elite, firms and roles of government, and they end up running our lives.
Yes.
That's what the problem is. It's not, if it was contained to these college campuses, that would be, who cares? Go ahead, go nuts, but it's very much not. And I think that, the whole thing with zooming out, like it's only happening in small places, that's true for so many things. I mean, look, going back to COVID for a minute, I've spoken to people in Florida who had no idea that our schools were closed for school year 20 to 21. Why would they? Why would they know what was going on in a New York City school district? Why would they know that? The schools were open in Florida, so they just assumed it was open everywhere.
Right.
And so one night, my husband and I were at a sushi place, and you sit at a counter and you end up talking to people. And this couple were like, "Oh, what made you leave New York?" And I said, "Oh, the COVID policies." And their minds were blown. They had no idea. Kids wearing masks? What? Like, just they had no idea. So I think that happens a lot in a lot of different ways. But the Columbia stuff and the Harvard and all of that, it ends up affecting everybody, even if we don't realize it's happening. The having your pronouns in your bio at the law firm or the bank that you work at, that crazy idea started on a college campus, somebody on a college campus, And so my prediction now, for example, they've gotten into the land acknowledgements. So how far are we from, a banker going into a meeting and saying like, "Hi, I'm from blank bank, and I would just like to acknowledge the land that we're standing on is, traditionally," just it's going to happen, and if we don't stop it, because they end up moving that needle all the time, and it does seep into our real lives, not just campus.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. I guess theoretically, I understand exactly what you're saying. Like, we have to find sort of ways of pushing back. My question is about what I'm watching on television. If they want to sleep on their lawn, let them sleep on their lawn.
Right.
Like, I feel conservatives say, "I can't believe they're destroying Colombia."
Right.
Who fucking cares if they destroy Colombia, right? But they have to pretend that their behavior happening on the campus is enough for them to bring a whole bunch of people in there and start battling, not even just Columbia, UCLA. What I see now is just a bunch of characters.
Yeah.
Like, so it's gone beyond the cause. It's gone beyond, and I understand people like, I do not agree with the students,
right?
What they're saying, what they're standing for, and it's gone beyond that. Now it's just, this is the show, right? The camera's on. Everybody, all the independent journalists are there trying to get that moment where, the spark goes and everything is crazy. So it's just, it just seems, it went past that moment of being organic to now it's manufactured. And that's why I don't really pay too much attention to it now. I just don't know what we can possibly do as far as stemming the tide when it comes to the amount of indoctrination that's happening there.
Yeah. I think that the colleges are largely lost, and we have to focus on younger kids. K through 12 is where the majority of indoctrination is happening now, I think. And it's got to be parents to put a stop to it. It's going to take a little bravery, no, I don't want my kid learning gender ideology in kindergarten, but thanks for the kind offer. But it's tougher than it sounds.
See, that's the place that we have more control. I completely agree with you there. We can stand up and say, no, we're not accepting this. Like we saw.
But it's tough. People don't stand up,
But here's the thing that I learned from the leftists. You don't need that many.
Right.
You don't need that many. People are fucking scared. And when they see 10 people show up screaming at them, they start reacting.
Good point.
So you don't need that many. You don't need
Right.
the entire town. You just need 10 actors. 10 actors, and they probably don't even have to be from there.
Right.
Because that's one
Right.
thing I later found out.
Yeah.
I have like a weird fan base out in Wisconsin.
Oh.
I say weird, not that people are weird, but weird that I have a fan out in Wisconsin. And I remember they would tell me during the CRT thing going on, they're out in like not even the suburbs, but kind of in the rural parts.
Yeah.
And they're like, who are these people showing up?
Right. They know everybody in my town. These are not from them.
They're not.
Yeah.
No, they were all from Milwaukee.
Yeah.
They were organized or from this organization. They drove all the way up there and were screaming and yelling and talking about all the. And what they would always do, they would have probably like one person from that school district who would say their story from that school district, but the rest of those people were, microphones and loudmouths. And I was like, these guys are so organized.
Really smart. Yeah. The left is so organized.
I
know. There's no, we don't have the stamina that they do. We just don't, live in a tent, like none of us are doing that.
Right. But there's so much. I give them props all the time for the amount of linguistic propaganda that they're able to accomplish.
Yeah.
And to get people to say stuff, even people who disagree with them, get them to say stuff that over a period of time, just constantly reinforcing that.
Yeah.
I've heard people on the right say gender. We never said gender 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I always say gender. We don't say sex anymore.
Right.
So I was like, man, these people are impressive how they get everybody to shift their language. And it makes me think about, you're talking about coming from Soviet Union. By the way, how old were you when you...
Like under 2.
Okay.
Really little, yeah.
It makes me think about all the people who are coming from the Soviet Union, whether they were children or they've heard the stories from their parents, and they're like, something's up here. Or people who came from China.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, I've seen this. Like, they're sensitive, but like for a good reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know why we're not heeding that warning.
Well, yeah, because when I say stuff like that, like in the book that I co-authored with Bethany Mandel, Stolen Youth, we open with a history chapter because to me it was very obvious that what is happening here in America now has happened in history before in all these totalitarian places, and the way that like the language and all of that, like. There was a sign on my block in Park Slope during summer of 2020, that said "All Lives Matter." They did not mean to say "All Lives Matter." It was just a foreigner, I think. It was like somebody from another country that was just like "All Lives Matter." No, my friend. That ended up being like a Facebook post, on one of the groups, like, "Hey, this is all." Anyway, they got to the person, and the person changed the sign because they did not mean, anything by it. The language and all of that enforcement, and you have to say it in the right way, and you have to make a spectacle of it, and you have to put the defund police sign on your window, and all of that is very familiar. Yeah. Anybody who has ever heard the stories of totalitarianism will know what it's about.
I can see the similarities between what is happening in these other places and what's happening here. Part of me wonders if we're just too comfortable to go that extra mile.
Right. That could easily be. On the flip side of that, like I've heard things like, I have friends in Israel who say like, oh, the gender ideology stuff will never happen here. And I say, why? And they're like, we're just not polite enough. Like the Americans are so polite. They're just like, oh, you want me to call you they? Like, okay, I will. I feel like for sure I used to use any pronoun that somebody wanted, and then it became plural, and then it became made up pronouns and all of that. But I felt like the polite thing to do was to refer to people how they want to be referred to, and they just don't think that they can manage that societally, that kind of politeness. And I get that. Americans are very polite, and they do try to make people feel good and do what they want, and that gets used against us. Yes. So,
all the time.
All the time.
And it seems like no one's learning from that.
Right.
Like, stop trying. like I'm generally a polite person.
Yeah.
I'm respectful. But like the pronoun thing, the pronouns are about what you're trying to do is control my speech when you're not there.
Right.
Like if you're trans in front of me, I'm not calling you your pronoun. That's weird.
Right.
I would say your name.
Yeah.
Or you or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's a control over language when you're not even in the room.
Right.
And that's weird to me.
And it's not just use my pronoun. It's okay, now I want you to declare your pronouns.
Yes.
I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. You know? Like, so yeah, there's a lot of like I grew up in New York City. I thought, you know, a lot of things that I think I was fine with I'm no longer fine with. Like I grew up going to like nightclubs and like drag shows, and you know, the drag queens were the just they ruled the nightclubs, and I loved it, and I loved everything about it, and they were wonderful to me and all of that. What does it have to do with reading to my children in the library? like drag shows, great. Drag shows at my kids' school, not great. You know? And that envelope keeps getting pushed because if you don't like it, then you're the bigot. And what used to be Drag Queen Story Hour, of course, is no longer. When's the last time we saw a book involved at all? Unless it was like, you know, Free Palestine. Now it's pure like drag shows for kids, and you're supposed to be okay with that. I'm not.
Yeah, the drag show thing is weird because it almost seems like it's a reaction. Like when you see parents purposely bringing them, it's like, Trump supporters don't like it. We're going to do more of them.
Right.
And it's almost like some of the drag performers are kind of like, listen, we're getting paid. So we're just doing. So it's kind of like a weird, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what's the motivation for it to happen.
I don't get, like, I would never do that. Like, an example sort of related to that, you know, there was a point where the American flag to the left, you know, in the last few years became, it's a MAGA symbol. And you wouldn't fly the American flag. I don't care who on the left is flying the American flag. It's my flag. I'm flying it. I don't care what they say. Like, I can't imagine a universe where I would capitulate to what the other side wants or do stuff because of what they do. It's crazy. What a crazy way to live.
Very.
You know, there's the anti-Israel right now is using like watermelons as like their like, I don't know, symbol of the resistance, blah, blah, blah. I love watermelons. I don't care. Like I'm going to not be eating watermelon because the anti-Israel people have decided that that's their symbol. Like, get out of here. You know?
I really hope they don't move the chicken because then it will be full blown. Black people are going to be upset. They stole our symbols. No, we're nearing the end. So I always like to ask, are you optimistic about the future?
It's so funny because I was always optimistic about America, about the future in America. I've definitely been shattered in the last few years from that. There was a point, and I wrote about it at the time. I think it was right after Obama was reelected. I was in an audience in New York at the public radio station. So super liberal, even for New York. And they asked who's optimistic about the future. Now, Obama has just been reelected. This is an audience who all voted for him except for me. And I'm like I was one of like two people who raised my hand because I didn't care who was president. I was optimistic about the country anyway. I thought that our future was heading in one trajectory. And now I just don't know. COVID again really shook me because everybody just so easily shut up. Didn't say anything. And like, especially my New Yorkers, like I thought, my New Yorkers would never stand for this. And they all stood for it. And it really did a number on me where I don't know that I can trust anymore. Now, having said that, being in Florida has made me a lot more optimistic than I was because I see a sanity here that I didn't see anymore in New York. And I mean that I have, you know, friends and acquaintances here who are left and right. And none of them think that, you know, a boy should be using a girl's locker room, you know, or any of this stuff. They just think it's common sense.
Yeah.
There was a study out of Holland recently a really large study on transgenderism in youth, and they tracked these kids for, I want to say 15 years, maybe even longer. And they saw how many of them thought they were the wrong gender, and then how many snapped out of it by the time they were in their 20s. And the thing is, you know what the answer is. I don't even need to tell you how the study ends. You know how it ends, because everybody knows how it ends. Most of the kids decided that they were the gender that they were born in. Tiny fraction didn't. And this is the kind of thing that we all know without being told. And that's what I feel like in Florida. I feel like, you don't need to explain stuff to people because it's obvious. No, we don't want porn in the school library. Like, it's just, we don't need to have the arguments around it, because it's everybody feels the same way. And so that has made me more optimistic. And then also just what's going on with Jews around the country. I feel very safe and secure in Florida, in not just my safety, but in being who I am and raising Jewish children who are open about that. I'm not sure that could be the case in a lot of places anymore. So, so that, overall pessimistic, but optimistic on Florida.
So you're locationally optimistic. I got you. In general, I'm optimistic. I think some of the stuff that we're dealing with is like any other time in history. I feel like history is good times, bad times, good times, bad times. And this is one of those times where we have some bad times, and the problems are different. They're always different. Right now, we're just trying to keep them from transing our kids. And then maybe next year, everybody will be like, you know what, that was a crazy time that we were just at. Just like COVID. All of a sudden, they're going to try to do that.
Like Europe is like, whoa, that was a crazy few years that we did that trans thing. And they're at the end of it. And we're not. So we'll see.
But that, to me, that shows like some people are waking up. And if Europe is doing it, then because they're, especially Western Europe, pretty liberal. So, if they're changing their mind, I think eventually things will get back to normal over here as well. We're just a massive country, and sometimes change is slow. But I'm optimistic for all these different people who are speaking up, who are saying something. I don't know about you, but it feels like you can say these things more freely than maybe you a year or two ago. And it's becoming more self-evident.
I agree.
So I think those little things I'm being optimistic for. As far as the presidency, I mean, I'm almost doesn't matter to me. I think local politics matters much more than if it's Biden or Trump. I don't think, even if Trump wins, that he's going to have a great time, because he's going to be a lame duck president. And they'll just wait 4 years before they work with you, and you get nothing done that you think.
But I don't know, the Biden for another 4 years, like, that seems like he really has done so much more damage than I imagined. So it's questionable. I don't know.
But you're still here.
We're still here.
I was told that the country was over if you won. We are still here.
Yes. But sorry, last thing I want to say. You're talking about optimism, like in the long term. The thing with having kids, of course, is that life is very short term. I guess, do I think that New York will eventually be back to, a good place? Yes. Do I think that the country's pendulum will swing back towards sanity? Yes. In the meantime, I have to get my kids to the sanest place I could think of. And that happens to be, Florida.
I did the same thing. I took my son out of school. What year was it? I guess it would have been his junior year. I took him out. Because it was and it wasn't even masking. It was just a terrible school. But like with everything going on, it made me hyper focus on, because he had a terrible entrance into high school with COVID and the restrictions. So the school, his freshman year from home, and then it was just a complete mess. And he's educationally minded, and he just didn't have a good experience. And he asked, "Can you take me out?"
Because that school will be fine maybe eventually, but you only have so much time. So
And now he just got his GED.
Right.
And he's ready to move on with his life. 18 years old now. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. When it comes to our children, you got to do the best.
In the short time.
In the short term, yeah. And sometimes that waiting for the pendulum to swing sucks.
Right. And you got to get them out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for allowing me into your home. And obviously we'll keep in touch.